And welcome back. We are back with more Speeding Through History. This is episode 4. Once again, we're joined by Don Gamble, and we're going to continue this episode talking about the tracks in the area that Don has raced at. In particular, a couple major tracks that have been part of his career down through the years. And we'll get to those in a minute. But Don, I am not going to start this episode without allowing you to talk about your dear friend Don Rotman, who we lost here just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I met Don years ago. Matter of fact, the first time I met him was at Lake Trobe Speedway. He was with Ronnie Dakenkope, and he was in somebody's face because they had done something that didn't please Ronnie. And I thought, whoa, man, this guy's really intense. And then later at Pennsylvania Motor Speedway, Don and Donna met me. There was a corn roast there, and I was trying to hold my recorder and hold the corn, and it just wasn't getting anything done. So Donna offered to help, and then she said, "What's that for?" And I said, "Well, I was going to record something for Rapping on Racing." And she said, "Well, would you like us to help you with it?" And I said, "Sure." And that's when I became part of the DNR Graphics uh, situation, a company that they had in Munhall and later up in West Homestead. And we were friends from then on in. And I'm thinking, geez, we must have been friends for 25 or 30 years. Just great people, just amazing people.
I had occasion to meet both of them over the years. Probably knew Donna a little better than I knew Dawn, and I knew we lost Dawn a number of years ago. But to have Dawn gone now as well, another piece of history, lost here around Western Pennsylvania because they were a big part of what went on in the racing world for sure.
Don was a character. Okay. His daughter, Denise, wanted to play softball, and he had other plans. He didn't want to get tied up chasing softball everywhere. So he says to her, "Do you realize that the ball field's built on a toxic waste dump? And if you play there, it's going to melt your shoes." But she played anyway. She caught on real early that Dad was he marched to the beat of a different drum.
Well, thank you for filling us in on Dawn. Another guy lost to history here. So let's jump back to the tracks again, and we're going to revisit a couple of them. One in particular, Lernerville Speedway. You have a long storied history with Lernerville Speedway, as does Carol Gamble. How did that all start?
Well, in 1972, Don asked Carol to sign cars in on pit road. The man who had been doing it was a local politician, and his responsibilities grew, and he had to leave. So, how why he picked Carol? Uh, we had She was involved with the official Speedway program, writing columns for that, and he saw them or he read them, and then she has several, and we'll get to one in a minute. But in the '80s, Carol started a sponsorship program while she was signing the cars in, and a company could sponsor their business for the evening. And it started out at $300, and eventually then it went up to $1,000. I have no idea what it is now, but that was Carol's baby. She got that started. And then, like I said, she was writing for the official Speedway program, and she had a column with her byline, and then we had another one that was a popular song at the time. It said, "You picked a good time to leave me, Lucille," and we just changed the last word. "You picked a good time to leave me loose wheels." And it was very popular. And what made it even better, okay, it was Carol, and it was Joan Burgess, and it was a couple other women. So the gossip came from many different directions, and everybody was trying to figure out, how does this person know what's going on here? Very, very popular. But that's how. Oh, and I was racing at Lernerville, so Carol was doing signing the cars in, and I was racing, and we became very good friends with Dawn and Helen, and that was in '72, and right up until Dawn's passing in '93, and then after that, the Helen wasn't as involved, but a long, long term. Uh, relationship and friendship.
Gene Lynch was the PR director at Lernerville for a time, and that didn't end well, did it?
Well, what happened? Uh, how did I know that was going to happen? Okay, I got it. You know, my kids are trying to message me. People are trying to call me. Okay, so there was an incident on the speedway where Ed Lynch was in a tussle with somebody, and they couldn't get him off the track. And they tried everything. So Martin sent someone down there with a backhoe to lift his car up to get it off the track. That kind of magnified the problem. And finally, they got him off the track. And when Gene came up to the press box, Don fired her on the spot. And later, much later on, they became friends again. But Ed caused a lot of problems for Gene. One night at Tri City, he did something, and I guess she was doing PR there, and people were throwing rocks up into the press box because they were mad. So never a dull moment with Ed Lynch.
So, while we're here, and I do want to talk about other promoters in a future episode, but while we're talking about Lernerville, again, you can't talk about it without talking extensively about Don Martin. He had quite the history. He was a race fan early on, but long before he was an owner and promoter, he was a fan. It dated back into the mid 40s after his discharge from the military. He became involved as a car owner with Dick Swartzlander, another guy we lost here not too many years ago. Talk a little more about Don Martin and just some of the things he did that not only were unique, but I think probably well ahead of his time.
Oh yeah. Well, he and Dick Schwartzlander were friends for a long time because Schwartzlander just lived a couple miles down the road from the racetrack, and Martin he owned quite a few cars. One of them was an Indy Roadster that Dick ran with the sprint cars. But Don said that it was a financial disaster being a car owner. But when he did the car owner thing, and he was a good car owner for Schwartzlander, but and they won their fair share of races. But he said it was a financial disaster, and how he got into the racetrack business. Earl Bauman, Dale Hafner, and Bucky Fleming started work on a quarter-mile track at Lernerville Park. Now, Lernerville Park was an amusement park, but if you were sitting in the grandstands today, it wouldn't be running the length of the track like the front straightaway. It would be perpendicular to that, and it went down over the hill. And that was where this Lernerville Park was. And it was a popular amusement park in the 40s. Well, Don didn't plan on owning a racetrack, but the people putting it together needed some help, and he had a trucking company. So he joined the group as a partner, and the original plans were to open in 1968. But as usual, the government was trying to put an ordinance in there to keep that from happening. And to beat the ordinance, he actually had to run two races in 67, and they were pretty much a financial disaster. But, he was the first promoter to guarantee the purse. And the first 100-lap race there was for modifieds, and he brought cars in from the Penn Western Racing Association and the sportsman cars that raced at Butler, Mercer, and Blanket Hill and Tri City. Well, the Penn Western cars were favored, but when the checkered flag fell, it was Newcastle's Johnny Axe in an immaculate number 34 Chevy Coupe in Victory Lane. And I have to clarify something that I had on my Facebook page. I said it was a former Lou Blaney car. Well, actually, it was only the body of a Lou Blaney car, and Johnny and his crew built their own car. But it ended up in Victory Lane. Ed Lynch, he was the only Penn Western guy there to finish. I think he was in the top three over Butler, a veteran Harry Hine, and the other winners or the other people there were Jimmy Minton and Russ Woolsey.
So, a long storied history. I want you to clarify something. You said he was the first to guarantee the purse. What kind of a Wild West was going on in stock car racing before there were guaranteed purses?
Well, If you want to go way back, many, many years before that, Smokey Shemp's uncle was promoting a race. And after the races were over, he took the money and left. And
That's
he
a pro-
didn't pay anybody.
that's a
And,
problem, right?
and that had happened periodically at other tracks. So drivers were a little reluctant to race at a track where they weren't sure. And by him guaranteeing the purse, he always had a nice field of cars.
We lost Don Martin in 1993, and a series of promoters and promotional and leadership teams were to come after that. Probably the most successful in the very beginning was led by Al Tronic, I believe. Would you agree that?
Yes, yes, he was pretty good. Well, we did need to mention that he bought out Earl Bauman, but Earl stayed there as part of the process at the track, and he helped as an assistant promoter until he passed away in 1985.
So Al Tronic comes along. Jim Ronick was a part of that as well.
Right.
This is not the easiest thing in the world to do running a racetrack, but from the grandstands where I was sitting, Ouch made it look pretty easy. I mean, that track was never not perfect.
Well, in addition to that, he did a lot of repairs. Like they built some of the grandstands. He and his son Tommy were always fixing the graders and the bulldozers and everything. All the mechanical equipment was there, and what they would do, they would find a broken down backhoe somewhere and park it down there, and they would take parts off the broken down one to fix the ones that they were using. And always had all the equipment was in tip top condition. And then Jim was more on the other side of the fence, like with maybe the paperwork part of it. But Ach and Jim and Tommy were an amazing part of Lernerville Speedway.
Short presence there of Barb Bartley and Tom Ronick promoted it for a couple of years. Dirt Motorsports ultimately bought the place. Now it's under the ownership of the Thompson family, and here we are, Don, almost 60 years later, and
Well,
it's still. Go ahead.
let's backtrack. With Ach, there was a co-promoter, Dave Bauman, and Dave was killed in a snowboarding accident, and then it was just Jim to pursue the opportunities the following year, and then Gary Arch Hunter joined Ach to do it for 1999 and 2000. Now, to give you an idea, I don't think you've ever met Arch Hunter, but he was a former policeman. And to give you an idea how tough this guy was, he pulled someone over and asked them to get out of the car, and they wouldn't get out. So he just ripped the door off the guy's car and pulled him out. So he was a tough customer. But then eventually he passed away, and it was just Ach. Then in 2004, Barb Bauman, that would be Earl's daughter, Barb Bauman Bartley, and Tom Ronick took on as co-directors and leased the track from the Martin family. And Bartley and Ronick leased the track later on from Dirt Motorsports in 2005.
Currently, again, under the ownership of the Thompson family, the Friday night tradition continues. And again, here we are nearly 60 years later, and the place remains the jewel it's always been. And that all goes back to Don Martin and what he started. As I said, a man well ahead of his time.
Right. And, I admire the Thompson family because when John, who became the face of the Thompson family being at Lernerville, they didn't have a clue. And John would call me 2, 3 times a week. What's this? How does this work? And most of the time they would follow the directions. And as they built on their learning and their background, they became very successful, like they are right now.
So I want to talk about another track that we did touch on earlier, and I remember you're describing your experience there as eye-opening, and that is your time as a promoter at Motordrome Speedway. Now, taking on the promoting job was, again, you've done nearly everything in racing, from flagman to probably work the concession stand and sold to 50-50 a time or two. but you hadn't been a promoter until you took on the reins at Motordrome. What year was that?
That I believe that was 96.
And just for 1 year, correct?
Yes. The problem was, well, there were five owners. And when owner number one would ask me to do something, then owner number three would say, no, 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 don't do that. Well, how I got involved in this, the people wanting to buy the track from Butch Overly had a meeting. I think it was in Johnstown or Somerset. And they invited, no, maybe it was Connellsville. They invited all the guys that had lots of money to this meeting. And so they're going through how they're going to handle this. And Bob Arsenberger had asked me to come along for just guidance and advice. Well, one of the people that was going to invest in it, his son later became a racer, pretty good racer, name escapes me, but he wanted to lease out the concession stands. And I said, that's not a good idea because your margin of value or your margin for profits is really big. I mean, a Coke's 10 cents, you could sell it for a buck and a half, whatever. He said, well, I'm never wrong. I said, well, sir, when you get home tonight, put a circle on the calendar because this is the first time, but you're wrong. And he got up and he stormed out of there. And I said to Arsenberger, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause you any problems. He said, the guy was a pain in the whatever, and we didn't want him to invest. So Danny White bought two of the shares. And then there was Senneth Kessler and a fellow that had an electrical company and Arsenberger. And they took over. But the problem was trying to get everybody on the same page. One night, Arsenberger's grandson, his name was Chris Sanner, got into a tussle with a guy named Steve Martinek. And they're going at it back and forth. And my son Darren was there, and he was a deputy sheriff, and he went over to break it up. And Arsenberger said, you know, I don't like you, and I don't like your old man. Said, why don't you get out of here? So Darren broke it up. And I told Bob, if you don't settle down, I'm going to have you arrested. So that didn't go over well with his wife. And when I got up to the press box later, her face was orange red. And she said, well, I went over to Danny White and I said, you better get him out of there because it's not going to look good on the headline of the racing papers. Motordrome track owner arrested. So he got him out of there. And Nancy Arsenberger, if she'd have had a knife, she'd have stabbed me. But that's when I decided five owners, and they're great guys, can't deal with it. They would have their meetings. Danny White had a hunting camp up near Seven Springs. And it was on like 50 or 60 acres of ground. Beautiful place. So I would go up there, and I'd wait for them to get there to have the meetings. And I'm sitting in my pickup truck eating a sandwich, and this baby deer comes over, and he's trying to get my sandwich. So I said, what the heck's he doing here? Well, when the meeting started, the doe and the dog came into the meeting. And I said, what's the story? That deer thinks he's a dog, but he doesn't bother anybody letting him in here for the meeting. But then they had all kinds of animals there. And the last thing they told me when I was leaving, make sure you lock the gate when you leave because we don't want the bear to get out.
Why?
So it was a very interesting place to go for meetings.
As the promoter at Motordrome, were you, was that a one-man job or did you have a partner in that?
No, it was just one guy trying to do it, but the staff I had good staff. There was a guy there named Joe who was really a great guy. And the problem was sometimes, I mean, all the owners had businesses up in the mountains, and the people that worked for them would never say no. And when I would say no, like I'd tell Arsenberger, no, you just thought I hit him over the head with a ball bat. Like one night, we had this hole in turn one, and I only had one maintenance guy, and he wasn't real good at maintenance. So Arsenberger says, there's a bad hole in turn one. And I said, but we have a problem. The water tank in the top of the hill is not allowing any water to come down into the pits for the concession stand. He said, what are we going to do about the hole? I said, drive around it till next week. You know where it's at. And then we went back, and what we found was there was a buckeye in the water line coming from the water tank at the top of the hill down into the concession stand because the toilets wouldn't work. They couldn't cook food. And he thought fixing that hole was more important. And just little things like that, I said, nah, this is not for me. And it was a smart move because I left there and I went to IUP and finally became the director of vocational education and stayed there for 15 years.
We're going to talk something about that one of these days. Your time at IUP. I know you have always had a passion for the technological and industrial arts. You and I have had more than a couple of conversations about, does
Right,
a high school kid really have to go to college, or
right.
can you do it with a vocational education? And when I hear people say you're not going to get anywhere unless you go to college, my answer is, have you paid a plumber lately?
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well,
we'll get to that someday. I want to get
hold,
back to the tracks, but
hold that thought.
yeah, go ahead.
Mike Rowe was on the TV today, and somebody said, we need 100,000 electricians. And they said to Mike, where are they? And he said, they're in the eighth grade. You got to get them when they're young, and you got to don't tell them everybody's going to college because there's enough college graduates working at Walmart. They don't need any more. So I see a trend coming where vocational education is going to be where it should be, training kids that either aren't college type students, so maybe they're not like myself. I don't. The only reason I went to college was it was a vocational training program for industrial arts teachers. But it Mike Rowe's on the right page. I'm
Yeah, I
sorry, I
couldn't
didn't mean
agree
to
more.
interrupt you.
Mike Rowe's very good at it, and you've spoken highly of again a vocational education. And we're a little off track here, but I don't mind talking about this. You think about not only just vocational education schools. Again, you had a component up at IUP that was very heavy into the vocations. But if you look now at a kid coming out of high school. You don't need to go to a vocational school because the unions are begging you to come.
Right.
I think of Local 66, the operators union. If I wasn't driving a tractor trailer from, my a good part of my life here, I think if I could do it over again, I might consider something like that. I like big toys. I like big, heavy equipment, and I think that Local 66 would be fine. Or if you have a penchant towards electricity, plumbing, whatever. Again, you and I are on the same page with the vocations.
Yeah, you'll never be out of work because people are always going to have toilets. They're always going to need electricity. They're always going to need a car. I mean, just you name something in your life where you won't need someone to maintain it or repair it, and you got me because I can't think of anything.
Well, I was going to ask you, Ben, back to Motordrome before we leave it completely, uh, but I think I got the answer already. Did you have any idea what you were getting into when you agreed to be the promoter?
No, I had always thought about, based on my experience at Lernerville and what a nice job the people running Lernerville did, I thought it was going to be a piece of cake. But the cake got stale.
I get that. So we have a couple minutes left in this episode. I want to jump in back into the tracks. Now we covered, I'm looking at a list, and we've covered nearly all of them that you raced at. One we didn't touch on, and I don't know how much time you spent at South Park, but South Park Speedway was on the grounds of what is now South Park. Is that correct or not?
Well, it was kind of adjacent to South Park. You would drive through South Park to get to the Speedway, which was up on a hill across from a drive in theater. And Levitsky Brothers owned the property. And the problem there was the drive-in theater didn't like the racing on Saturday nights because it made a lot of noise.
I get that.
But it was a nice track, and matter of fact, that's the track where Don Luffy won his PRA championship, and it was like on a last or next to the last lap in a late model feature.
Was it another of the little quarter mile tracks?
Yes,
Nice.
and
Yeah,
the
she.
interesting thing was it was up on a hill,
Okay.
so if you had a outfit like mine, I had to have I would get in the stock car, and my buddy would drive the tow car, and you had to push the car up the hill because the tow car wasn't strong enough to tow the race car.
You turned a lap or two at Thunder Valley Speedway. That's up sort of central Pennsylvania. Is that fair?
Yeah, it was up there. We did that. The senior series went there, I think, twice. And the people that owned that were nice. The wife was a school teacher, and I think the owner was into strip mining and coal. But that was a long time ago. So my memory's a little fuzzy.
So, a big half-mile track just outside of Franklin, Pennsylvania, Tri-City Speedway. Again, another track that has gone through a number of ownership changes just in the last 20 something years, but it continues. And I do believe they just went back, or they announced they were going to go back to a Friday night racing, unless they've changed their mind on that again. But you spent some time at Tri City. How about your time up there?
Always enjoyed going up there when Mike and Margaret Graham and their partner were running a place. It was immaculate, and the racing was always good. And here's the funny thing: I always thought it was funny anyway. The flagman was Greg Wheeling, and I raced at a lot of tracks. But the one guy I wouldn't try to pull a fast one on was Greg Wheeling because I knew he'd figure it out. And I told him that one time. He said, "Well, I appreciate that." And then I met his brother Steve, who worked in the pits, and it was just a beautiful place. We picked up a feature win there over the years, and just it was a nice place. And the ground was immaculate, and it just people enjoyed that. Now the people that are running it now, I'm a little concerned about them. All right, they live in Harrisburg. Apparently, money is no object. But running on a Friday night against Lernerville and having sprint cars, what do they want to have it so each track has 8 cars?
Yeah, I heard that. I wonder how that's going to shake out. I guess we sit back and we see how it works. I don't know what the plan was there, but it is what it is. Yeah, Tri City, another one of those long tracks that just has this long history. And did you ever run the senior series at Tri City?
Yes,
Very
yes,
nice. So I'm not going to leave Tri City without mentioning a dear friend of both of ours, and that's Walt Weimer. Walt
yeah.
was the announcer at Tri City for many, many years. And Walt, I would love to have in the seat where you're sitting right now one of these days. We're going to see if we can make that happen because he is just about as full of information as you are. And I don't know whether we'll be able to make that happen, but someday I'd like to. Greg Wheeling, you already mentioned. I already have spoken to him or messaged with him. We're going to have him in that seat one of these days because another one that's just so much experience as an official. Another perspective, if you will, of being an official. So we're going to try to have him. So as we move on with speeding through history, we are going to come down to the last couple of minutes of this episode here in a minute. Is there anything we missed covering all of these tracks that you raced at and some of the ones you didn't race at? I don't know that you listed Butler on your list or not, but
Never
Butler
raced it.
was. Go
Never
ahead.
raced at Butler. That would be while I was either involved or getting involved at Lerner.
Okay.
But you mentioned Walt Weimer. He's my hero. I mean, he probably forgot more than I know, and that's a lot.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'd love to. Maybe we'll get you in my corner here, and we'll see if we can get Walt involved in doing this the way you and I are doing it. But so, what have we missed with some of these tracks? You got a story somewhere? We're gonna go. We're gonna talk about promoters and announcers in future episodes with you here. But just something about one or two tracks that stand out as wow, that was an awesome place to go.
Well, obviously Lernerville, Pittsburgh. I really enjoyed racing at Pittsburgh, and I liked racing at Motordrome, mainly on the dirt. A couple races on the asphalt. The one that come to mind, it was a senior series race, and Bud Kunkel would let me borrow his car from time to time. So I'm trying to think. The guy that won it always had those Vegas, those really fancy Vega race cars, modifieds. Help me out here.
Mm.
Bob Stanford. Okay. Bob won the race. He had a big block in his Chevelle, and I think it must have had pistons the size of water buckets. And he won it, and I finished second. But you would have thought I won the biggest race of my life because behind me it was Pee Wee Flick, Blackie Watt, and Jim Bickerstaff. And I beat all three. Well, I finished in front of all three of them, and I still think about that. And it was a very special moment, and I thank Bud for a lot of times when I drove his cars.
In the couple of minutes we have left, you've mentioned it a few times. Talk about how much fun it was running the senior series.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was guys that were good racers. And, it was sort of like a senior series in golf or anything else. Like the first one we had was at Motordrome on the dirt. And Pee Wee Flick won it. And he was in this big sedan. And I said, well, that was pretty good. He says, what's your secret? He said, my CD player, my 8-track was working. I was listening to music. but Skipper Vesti was there. Ronnie Hindman was there. Buddy O'Connor was there. I mean, some of the really legendary drivers were just having a fine time. And, and the cars, I would say the average car at the time was maybe $500 or $600. So it wasn't like anybody was going to the poorhouse. And a lot of them would borrow a car from a relative or a friend or whatever, not like Stanford owned his own car. And he was meticulous as a mechanic, and anything he built was a winner, and he won a bunch.
Well, the Bud Kunkel cars you borrowed were no slouches either.
No, they weren't. We had our fair share of checkered flags, and when we talk about the some of the other tracks, and when I was in his cars, and how I was proud that he would put me in them, and just a lot of stories there.
So, Don, as we look forward to future episodes, and again, we're going to keep doing this to either you, me, or somebody else gets tired of it. I would like to give you a little homework, and that is to start thinking about promoters. We talked about Don. I know we talked about Ed Witzberger, but there were so many other promoters out there who, some of them probably shouldn't have quit their day jobs. Some of them were well ahead of their time. Also, I want to touch on race officials. Some of the people you've dealt with. You mentioned Greg, one of the one of the only race officials you decide you'd never cross. But there's got to be more out there that you've had, let's say some fun with over the years. So we're going to give you that as homework for the next time. We're going to do it next week one more time. And you have been watching Speeding Through History. Thanks, Don Gamble, and we'll see everyone in a week.
Thank you.